Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Deputy President. I rise to strongly support the motion passed in the Senate this morning on the Hamas attacks on Israel. I was incredibly proud to support this motion, and I join coalition colleagues who have condemned the unprovoked and abhorrent attack by militant Hamas. I also unequivocally support Israel's right to self-determination and its right to exist and its right to protect its own citizens, which is enshrined in international law. The removal of the threat of Hamas is essential. And Australia, alongside like-minded nations, must support efforts by Israel to defend itself and its people against future such atrocious attacks. And one of the principles I think that unites us all in here is that we must support others that we would hope and expect to support us in similar circumstances. Because if this happened to us, if this unimaginable atrocity happened to us, we would expect and we would hope that our like-minded allies and friends supported us as well. Now, Hamas has brought Israel's response upon itself, and in doing so it has tragically exposed to danger the very people, the Palestinian people, they cruelly claim to stand for. Hamas and Hamas only are responsible for the current loss of Israeli, Palestinian and many other lives. Now, I don't envy the moral dilemma of the Israeli government, and it's not one that any of us would envy. No one ever wants to see lives lost. All lives, all human life deserves care and support, including Palestinians. And that is why the Coalition supports properly targeted humanitarian assistance. However, that said, let us not be led into false equivalences that some in this chamber and elsewhere have sought to do. In its attack, Hamas acted with surprise and they acted with intent to brutally kill innocent civilians. They took hostages, men, women, children, babies. Israel, in contrast, provided public warnings to minimise civilian losses. It is targeting the weapons it uses, its capabilities, and also to the perpetrators of terrorist attacks. Last week in Perth, I had the privilege of attending the Solidarity with Israel event held by the Jewish community of Western Australia at the Perth Hebrew Congregation in Manoora. There, over 1,000 West Australians gathered in support of Israel and its people, singing Asher Shalom, a prayer for peace. The grief and the sadness in the room was palpable from the impacts of these horrific attacks, with so many people in Western Australia and in Perth in particular having family, having relatives, having friends who've got caught up in these attacks. And I couldn't help reflecting, sitting there, listening and sharing in the experience, that sometimes in the face of great evil, there are simply no words to adequately convey how you feel. And this was certainly one of those moments. But I hope that by being there with many of my West Australian Liberal colleagues, spoke much louder than words ever could. 11 days ago, at 6:35 a.m. in the morning Israel Standard Time, the first air raid sirens were activated in southern and central Israel in response to Hamas missiles, to thousands of them. Rockets rained down on the people of South Israel, and the terror that were unleashed, a lot of us have seen the photos and the footage. It was the most inhumane attacks on innocent civilians. It was designed to be brutal, it was designed to be deadly, and it was designed to send a message. It was quite simply a bloody, brutal murder, a savage act that should have no place in our world today. And it has certainly shaken the foundations of our shared values, which are amongst the worst examples of what has happened here, of terrorism in the modern age. And the pain and the suffering of the Israeli people is reverberating and being shared around the world. Now, I was very proud that the former coalition government officially recognised Hamas as a terrorist organisation, as have so many other nations. I'd like to take this opportunity to condemn all forms of terrorism, all forms of violence, horror, and the use of fear and terror and death to achieve political and ideological goals. Having travelled to Israel many times, I know that the State of Israel is a robust parliamentary democracy, much like Australia. And Australia stood with the Ukraine when it was subjected to the barbarity of the Russian invasion. And now today, we also stand with Israel in its hours, days, months and years of need to come. Global support for Israel's right to exist, its right to self-defence, and also its fight against anti-Semitism is crucial for us all to stand up in this place and support. Australia was proud to lead the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the definition of anti-Semitism. Hamas's brutal attack has also led to the largest killing of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust in World War II. And such targeted slaughter, for that's what it was, should never lead to the scenes of jubilation that we have seen in our very own nation. In fact, at the heart of Sydney, at the Sydney Opera House. These disgraceful anti-Semitic acts on the steps of the Opera House, they stain our nation and they deepen the stain for Australia's strong and proud Jewish community. There is no question, and I've seen that myself many times, Australia's relationship with Israel is underpinned by a vibrant Australian Jewish community. And I've seen that again in action many times in Western Australia. And through this motion that we passed in this place today, the Australian Parliament has sent a very clear message to the world, especially to our Australian Jewish community, that we do stand with you in your time of need and support. But I have to say that there are sometimes occasions in this place where I feel great shame for what is said and what is done in this chamber. And fortunately, that does not happen very often. But the behaviour of the Greens and also some of the Teals in the other place, I think, are also a stain on our nation. It was distressing to see members of the Greens wearing a Palestine keffiyeh in this building, in fact wearing them every day this week. And the extremist rhetoric coming from the Greens themselves and from some of the Teals has no place in this nation. There can be no justification for anybody in this place or in the other place to support terrorism and to support the acts of terrorists, and particularly these most barbaric attacks in Israel, the largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. And I also find it abhorrent that the Greens and some Teals in the other place are creating that false equivalence between Hamas terrorist attacks and the legitimate right of Israel to defend itself and to defend its citizens. And in conclusion, the Australian relationship has a long and a very strong and a very proud relationship. And this month actually marks the 106th anniversary of the First World War Battle of Beersheba, in which Anzac forces played a decisive role fighting alongside their Allied counterparts in that war. And Australia was the first country to vote in favour of the 1947 UN partition resolution, which led to the creation of the State of Israel as a sovereign state, with the right to defend itself under international law, which all other nations enjoy. And I was privileged to be at in Beersheba itself for the 98th anniversary of the famous mounted charge of the Australian 4th Light Horse Brigade, for a very moving service to commemorate the 31 light horsemen killed and the 36 wounded in the charge. So We do share a long history together, a close history together, and Australia must continue to stand by Israel. Thank